Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Sven Spengemann, and I'm your Liberal candidate for the beautiful waterfront riding of Mississauga Lakeshore. I would like to thank Niall and Bernina McNamara for hosting us today. Over the past 18 months, the Liberal government took strong action to establish health and safety protocols, procure vaccines, and provide economic support for individuals, businesses, and organizations. In this election, residents of Mississauga Lakeshore are looking for leadership on climate change and the environment, finishing the fight against COVID-19 and a strong recovery, better health care, housing, and childcare. A re-elected Liberal government will address these priorities and more. We have an ambitious, thoughtful platform, and together we will move Canada forward for everyone. And on that note, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the leader of the Liberal Party, who has had our backs throughout the pandemic, and my friend, Justin Trudeau.
Thank you so much, Sven. It's good to be here with you, along with our great Mississauga team, Ichwinder, Ikra, Peter, Omar, and Richie. And also thank you to Niall and Bernita for welcoming us to their beautiful home. I want to start today by making a note that this is the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. I think many Canadians remember, any Canadian who was of a certain age remember that day extraordinarily clearly. I was teaching in Vancouver that morning and remember talking to my grade 9 students all that day and every subsequent class about what this means for the future, what that meant for the present. And I think 20 years gone, we need to reflect on that day, on the thousands of people lost, including 24 Canadians, on the first responders, including a number of Canadians who showed up in the days and weeks afterwards to help, who rushed into danger while others were fleeing for their lives. Ça a été un moment où les gens ont été là les uns pour les autres. On a été ébranlés, mais on a su prendre des actions concrètes pour lutter contre le terrorisme, incluant en Afghanistan, où nous continuons d'être là, malgré tous les sacrifices, pour continuer à créer un monde meilleur pour les Afghans, pour nous tous. Je remercie aussi les gens des Forces armées canadiennes qui ont fait ces sacrifices, qui luttent encore contre le terrorisme à travers le monde, loin de leurs familles, loin de leurs proches. I think as well about Canadians who stepped up for each other. People in Newfoundland who, even as they are dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Larry, will think back to 20 years ago with well-earned pride at having welcomed thousands upon thousands of travelers into Gander, into homes, as Canadians did across the country from Halifax to Vancouver. And I also can't help on this anniversary to reflect on Muslim Canadians, for whom things also changed on September 11th as attitudes shifted. And that reminds us that over these past years and continuing today and into the future, we all need to stand together against intolerance, hatred, racism, and Islamophobia. But the story that we tell ourselves and we remember of that day is ultimately a story of people coming together. Because that's what we do in times of crisis as Canadians. That's how we got through these past 18 months. We were there for each other. We had each other's backs. And we will continue to have each other's backs because that's the way to build a better future. As a government over the past 6 years, we focused on families like the McNamara's. We focused on building a better future for the middle class. And we did that with the Canada Child Benefit that put hundreds of dollars every month tax-free in the pockets of Canadians, with the raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. Not only did we create 1 million jobs over the first few years of being in office, but we also lifted 1 million people out of poverty. And the ability to do those two things together, and the fact that actually you have to do those two things together, was the starkest contrast with the Conservative government that had preceded us. Because Conservatives can't seem to get away from the idea that the best way to grow the economy is through trickle-down, is to help the wealthiest and hope that that ends up making its way to benefiting everybody else. It doesn't. It never has, anywhere it's been tried in the world. And our record shows that we were able to support the middle class and grow the economy better than Conservative governments were. And unfortunately, Erin O'Toole is taking exactly that same approach. Everywhere I go, I talk to people who are worried about housing. Erin O'Toole's plan on housing is to give tax breaks to wealthy landlords so they can sell their buildings. He's devoted $500 million in his platform to that. That doesn't help families own a home. That's certainly not going to help the McNamara's kids when they grow up own a home. Mr. O'Toole's approach on childcare is to give tax breaks and hope that families are somehow able to create spaces for themselves. Families who need childcare aren't in the business of creating spaces. Our society, our country, our provinces need to create spaces. That's why we set $30 billion forward in Budget 2021 to make sure that provinces across the country are able to create 250,000 spaces and cut the price of childcare right now in half over the next year, get it to $10 a day in 10 years. That'll save $1,400 a month on average for families here in Mississauga. $1,400 a month more than Erin O'Toole's plan. Again, he doesn't understand that to grow the economy, you need to support the middle class, not the wealthiest. His approach on health care is what? It's to promise $60 billion, but not deliver any of it for the next few years. How can you come through a pandemic and not realize we need more money for health care now? Our plan on health care is about $25 billion over the next 5 years. $6 billion of that is in the first year for catching up on backlogs and surgeries and treatments. And that $6 billion is more than Erin O'Toole plans to spend on health care, all told, including mental health and transfers to the provinces, over 5 years. That's not how you create a stronger economy. That's not how you support the middle class. And you cannot have a plan for the future of the economy if you don't have a plan to fight climate change. Canadians get that. And yet his plan is yet again to go back to the Harper approach and the Harper targets on fighting climate change. You can't fight climate change by giving breaks to wealthy oil companies. That's part of his plan. We need to continue on the path we're on. We need to keep growing the economy in the right way. That's why our housing strategy focuses on 3 big things. Tens of thousands of dollars that young families particularly are going to be able to save up faster so they can make a down payment on their new homes. because we need young people to get that best start. We're going to be working with municipalities with a $4 billion investment to create 1.4 million homes over the coming, build and refurbish 1.4 million homes over the coming years, so people have a better supply. And we're going to stand up for home buyers' rights by cracking down on predatory, unfair practices like blind bidding and house flipping and foreign investors. These are the things people need so they can own their homes. On childcare, well, childcare isn't just a social program, it's an economic program. Yes, $10 a day childcare will help families make sure that their kids are good and safe and having the best start. But it also ensures that families are able to save thousands of dollars every month that they can put towards mortgage or groceries or save for the future. And at the same time, and this is where you understand how much Erin O'Toole doesn't get the Canadian economy, when he refuses to accept that getting better choices for women to get into the workforce once again is what's going to grow our economy as fast as we need it to. That's why the business community, for the first time, because of this pandemic, came out strongly and clearly in favor of $10 a day childcare, in favor of the plan that we're putting forward that 8 out of 13 provinces and territories have already signed, and that Erin O'Toole plans on ripping up to pay for all the cuts he wants to give to wealthiest Canadians. That's in his platform, and it shows he doesn't understand how to grow the economy for the middle class and people working hard to join it. Because that's what we're doing. And that's what we're focused on. We've done an awful lot over these past 6 years. We did an awful lot through this pandemic. And even as Erin O'Toole was saying that we were putting too much money out into the economy, too much money to support families and workers and seniors and small businesses, we knew that supporting people with the CERB, with the wage subsidy, with the rent subsidy, with payments and supports to Canadians who needed it, wasn't just the nice thing to do, it was the smart thing to do. Because having families with the right supports while we were in lockdown, having businesses be able to pause, to hold, but not disappear through those dark moments of public health measures, is what, first of all, allowed us to have a pandemic path that was better than most of our allies, and is allowing us to bounce back stronger and faster than just about anyone else. We have already recovered 95% of all the jobs lost during the pandemic. For context, the US has only recovered 76%. Nous avons fait les choses que nous avions besoin de faire pour appuyer les gens, mais aussi pour rebâtir l'économie. Et ce que M. O'Toole continue de nous démontrer, c'est qu'il ne comprend pas que pour créer une économie forte, il faut investir dans les familles de la classe moyenne. Il continue à vouloir donner des avantages aux mieux nantis, dans l'espoir que ça lancera l'économie, mais ça ne fonctionne pas, ça n'a jamais fonctionné. Et moi, je le sais, qu'on a tous hâte d'en finir avec cette pandémie. Mais la seule façon qu'on peut parler de rebâtir l'économie, c'est d'abord d'en finir avec cette pandémie. Et ça passe par les vaccinations. Alors, quand M. O'Toole démontre qu'il ne comprend pas ça, en ne même pas pouvant exiger que ses propres candidats soient vaccinés, en disant que non, les voyageurs n'auront pas à être vaccinés, non, les travailleurs de la fonction publique n'auront pas à se faire vacciner, il démontre qu'il est prêt pour défendre les droits de ceux qui ne choisissent pas de faire la bonne chose pour leurs voisins. Il met à risque notre santé, la santé de nos enfants qui ne peuvent pas se faire vacciner. Il met à risque la vitesse, il met à risque d'avoir d'autres confinements dans les mois à venir, ce que personne ne veut. Mais il met en plus à risque notre reprise économique. C'est pas être bon pour l'économie à ce niveau-là. Comme vous savez, il y a bien des choses sur lesquelles je suis en désaccord avec M. O'Toole, que ce soit son désir d'amener plus de privés dans le système de santé, que ce soit son désir de ramener les armes à feu de style militaire. Mais ce matin, parlons économie. Of all the things I disagree with Mr. O'Toole on, his willingness to bring back military-style assault weapons, his desire to see more private, for-profit options in our healthcare system, the big one I disagree with him on is his view on how to grow the economy, how to support Canadians the right way into our future. Invest in the middle class. Invest in the fight against climate change to create good jobs for the future. Support families with things like childcare and massive investments in better housing. These are the things that grow our economy. These are the things that Mr. O'Toole doesn't get and would cut. That's the choice Canadians are facing in this election. And I know from the conversations I've had with people from coast to coast to coast that Canadians are optimistic about their future, are excited about the things we can do together to build that better future. And we know it's not going to be easy. Nothing is. This pandemic was hard. Fighting climate change is hard. But we also know that we are very capable of doing it together. And that's what I'm excited about. And that's what we're rolling up our sleeves on across this country to work on with Canadians. So in this choice, in this election, it is whether we move forward with a progressive vision for supporting families and building them a better economic future, or do we go back to an approach that failed Canadians time and time again? While Erin O'Toole wants to take back Canada, I'm for moving forward for everyone. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. We'll now start the question period with Christy Kirkup from the Globe and Mail.
Good morning. In Jody Wilson-Raybould's new book, she describes you becoming angry and disdainful about a PMO campaign, a pressure campaign, to interfere in a criminal prosecution. She also says she believes that you wanted her to lie. So the question is, did you want her to lie, and why did you get so angry?
I did not want her to lie. I would never do that. I would never ask her that. That is simply not true. These issues that were brought up have been talked about over the past couple of years now. They've been studied out in committee. The Globe and others have written on them extensively. They were fully looked at before the last election. But it does make me reflect on the fact that as you do big things, as you work hard for Canadians, over the years, you end up carrying a number of things. And I can't help but think as well about all the good things, all the big things that we were able to accomplish together, whether it's on fighting climate change, on medical assistance in dying, on reconciliation where there's absolutely lots more to do. And my focus throughout the past 6 years, as Canadians know, has always been on fighting for Canadians, on doing big things for people. And that's exactly what I'm going to stay focused on and fighting for. Ces allégations sont fausses. C'est pas quelque chose que j'ai fait ou que je ferai. Je pense que les gens savent qu'on a discuté longuement au cours des 2 dernières années de tous ces enjeux. Ça a été discuté et étudié longuement, même avant la dernière élection. Mais quand on veut faire, au cours des 6 dernières années, quand j'ai voulu faire de grandes choses, c'est sûr que on finit par accumuler le poids de certaines décisions, de certaines réalités. Mais je pense aussi à tout ce qu'on a accompli ensemble au fil des années, sur l'aide médicale à mourir, sur la justice, sur la réconciliation, sur la lutte contre les changements climatiques, sur la croissance pour la classe moyenne. On a fait énormément de choses et je vais continuer d'être extrêmement ambitieux et optimiste pour ce pays et continuer de me battre à tous les jours pour un meilleur avenir pour ces familles, pour toutes les familles d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays.
Following up.
Why should Canadians trust your word versus the words of an Indigenous woman, a lawyer, a former chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and someone you trusted to assume the role of Justice Minister and Attorney General? Why should Canadians believe you versus Jody Wilson-Raybould?
I think that was a question that many people asked over the past, over 2 years ago, when these issues were all studied and litigated and heard in committee and detailed. It is unfortunate when people who believe in a similar optimistic vision for the country end up moving in different directions and end up disagreeing. It's no fun. It's not something anyone wants to have to go through. But like I said, when you are focused on doing big things and stepping up for Canadians, you end up carrying things. And I carry them, and I look towards the future, and I look towards the things that we need to keep doing to fight every day for a better future for Canadians.
Next question.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. Je voulais revenir à une question que je vous ai posée hier parce que vous y aviez presque répondu. Alors, je vais avoir une réponse plus claire. Qu'est-ce que ça vous a fait cette semaine de voir que M. Legault a essentiellement dit que le ciel est bleu, l'enfer est rouge?
Écoutez, mon père m'en avait parlé beaucoup quand il était jeune, quand j'étais jeune, au niveau de la lutte contre la dominance de certains en politique québécoise et le besoin d'une révolution tranquille. Pas que je suis en train de faire de parallèle du tout, mais vous utilisez une citation dont je me souviens très bien. Écoutez, je pense que M. Legault a mis clair ses propres priorités. Moi, ma priorité, c'est de lutter et de livrer pour les Québécois. Et j'ai pu livrer énormément de choses pour les Québécois. Pas juste pendant cette pandémie, où 8 $ sur 10 de toute l'aide qu'on a envoyée aux Québécois, aux Canadiens, venait du fédéral, que ce soit de l'aide pour les systèmes de santé, que ce soit de l'aide avec la PCE pour les entreprises. On a été là pour les gens. Mais en plus, j'ai pu travailler main dans la main avec M. Legault sur l'Internet haute vitesse dans tous les ménages québécois avant la fin de l'année prochaine. Quand on a pu investir ensemble dans l'ion électrique, dans l'énergie éolienne, dans l'aérospatiale, on est en train de travailler ensemble et de livrer pour les Québécois. Mais je connais, en tant que Québécois, moi aussi les Québécois. Et je sais que les Québécois ne veulent pas le retour des armes d'assaut de style militaire dans nos communautés, ce que M. O'Toole est en train de refaire. Et mais vous n'avez pas juste à me croire, vous n'avez qu'à écouter Police se souvient qui a fait ses preuves dans cet enjeu-là. Je sais que les Québécois ont besoin, les familles québécoises ont besoin de plus de place en garderie. Et le 6 milliards de dollars que nous, on envoie sans condition à M. Legault et à son gouvernement va permettre de créer des dizaines de milliers, jusqu'à 37 000, selon M. Legault, places en garderie. Ça, c'est quelque chose dont les Québécois ont besoin. Et je sais aussi que les Québécois croient profondément dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques et je ne peux pas imaginer que les Québécois veulent revenir en arrière à l'approche de Stephen Harper sur les changements climatiques. Donc, M. Legault, évidemment, peut partager sa perspective sur le fédéralisme, mais sur l'avenir du Québec, sur l'avenir que veulent bâtir les Québécois, je pense que mes valeurs et les valeurs du Parti libéral du Canada s'alignent beaucoup plus avec ce que veulent les Québécois pour l'avenir.
En suivi?
Deux petites questions en une. Est-ce que vous avez vu comme une trahison, finalement, après avoir donné tout ce que Québec voulait, cette intervention de M. Legault? Et à l'inverse, est-ce que vous pensez que si vous vous étiez mêlé de l'élection de M. Legault, est-ce qu'il aurait mal réagi?
Écoutez, les premiers ministres des provinces ont une job à faire. Mais le gouvernement fédéral et le premier ministre du Canada a une job à faire aussi. Et on ne va pas toujours être parfaitement alignés, mais on se rejoint sur une chose. Il faut se battre à tous les jours pour livrer pour les Québécois, pour les Canadiens. Et c'est ce que j'ai fait. M. Legault semble faire le calcul que de recevoir moins pour les Québécois avec moins de conditions, c'est mieux que d'en recevoir plus pour les choses dont on a besoin. On envoie 6 milliards de dollars pour les familles qui vont être utilisés sûrement pour plus de places en garderie. M. O'Toole n'enverra pas ce 6 milliards. Ben, c'est facile de mettre 0 condition sur 0 dollar. Voyons.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Je vais vous parler de l'Ontario. Vous avez visité 3 circonscriptions libérales sur 4 depuis votre visite hier. On a l'impression que vous êtes en mode défensif. Est-ce que vous craignez de voir la grande région de Toronto vous glisser entre les doigts, M. Trudeau?
C'est comme de poser la question, Louis, si Aaron O'Toole devrait jamais faire campagne en Alberta ou Saskatchewan parce que on a des et lui, il y a des comtés facilement gagnables là. Pour moi, on doit travailler avec tous les Canadiens et prendre personne pour acquis et de pouvoir passer le message important aux Canadiens du choix qu'on est en train de faire dans ces élections. Ça se fait à travers le pays. La grande région de Toronto est un centre important pour passer le message. C'est vrai qu'il y a un petit défi pour le Parti libéral de trouver des circonscriptions qu'on n'a pas ici dans la grande région de Toronto avant les dernières élections. Mais on a visité déjà, je pense, toutes les circonscriptions dans la grande région qu'on n'a pas eues. C'est évident qu'on va continuer de partager le message dans des belles régions comme ici à Mississauga.
En suivi?
Ce serait quoi votre avertissement pour les électeurs progressistes ontariens qui peut-être ne pensent pas voter pour vous?
Bien, je pense que on a vu ça un petit peu dans certains politiciens progressistes comme le Parti NPD et le Parti vert qui essayent de dire qu'il n'y a aucune différence entre un gouvernement libéral et un gouvernement conservateur. Peut-être pour eux, il n'y a aucune différence s'ils arrivent à avoir des places à la Chambre des communes, mais je peux vous dire, pour les Canadiens, ça fait une énorme différence qu'il y ait un gouvernement progressiste ou non en place. Tout ce qu'on a fait pour lutter contre les changements climatiques, tout ce qu'on a fait pour livrer pour les familles, que ce soit l'allocation canadienne aux enfants, que ce soit maintenant l'aide de garderie à 10 $, ça fait une différence profonde dans la vie des familles à travers le pays. Et de prétendre que ça fait aucune différence, comme fait le NPD, pour des fins purement partisanes électoralistes, c'est pas de bien servir les gens en Ontario ou ailleurs à travers le pays.
Next question.
Good morning, Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. Yesterday, you started to push back very hard against the NDP and the Green Party for saying that you've done nothing on things like climate change. They've been saying that for a long time. Is this a strategy that you're now adopting because their words are starting to work?
You know, people sort of expect that the NDP and the Green Party will put forward really ambitious plans, for example, on fighting climate change. And I think it's been a shock to those who've actually been paying attention and watching closely and listening to experts that neither the NDP nor the Green Party have put forward a real plan to fight climate change in this election. And instead of explaining why they get a failing grade from experts on their plan to fight climate change, they're trying to drag everyone else down. They're trying to say that we've done nothing over the past 6 years. I'm sorry. A price on pollution right across the country, over the objections of Conservative premiers all the way to the Supreme Court, is not nothing. Banning single-use plastics across the country is not nothing. Protecting more of our land and oceans than ever before in the history of this country is not nothing. I could go on. Progressives know there's always more to do, so you could always say, we haven't done enough. Fair enough, I agree with that. There's more to do. That's why we're putting forward an even more ambitious plan to keep moving forward. But it is profoundly cynical to try and convince people that the other guys have done and are doing nothing when you yourself can't do your homework and put forward a credible plan to propose as an alternative. Je pense que on voit depuis un petit bout de temps, il y a des gens qui sont un peu confus que le NPD et même le Parti vert aient décidé de ne pas mettre de l'avant un plan sérieux pour lutter avec plus d'ambition contre les changements climatiques. Et c'est pas juste moi qui le dis, c'est des experts qui ont fait l'analyse des différents plans qui nous donnent un A ou un A- dans notre plan pour lutter contre les changements climatiques et qui donnent un F, un échec au Parti néo-démocrate. Et leur réponse, c'est d'abord, au lieu de corriger ou de renforcer ou expliquer comment leur plan est bon, ce qu'ils ne font pas, leur réponse, c'est à la place essayer d'abaisser notre plan. Essayer de convaincre les gens qu'on n'a rien fait depuis 6 ans. Mais excusez-moi, mais un prix sur la pollution à travers le pays, c'est pas rien. Surtout quand il a fallu lutter à chaque étape contre les politiciens conservateurs qui voulaient l'enlever. De bannir les plastiques à usage unique, c'est pas rien. De protéger plus de nos terres et de nos océans que n'importe quel autre gouvernement dans le passé, c'est pas rien. Et de prétendre que c'est rien pour distraire du fait que vous n'avez pas fait vos devoirs pour mettre d'avant un plan concret, ben, c'est juste du cynisme. Et on n'a pas besoin de plus de cynisme en politique. On en a déjà trop. On en a besoin de moins.
Following up.
You've also said repeatedly throughout this campaign that Canadians need to do what it takes to stop the pandemic, including getting vaccinated. But of course, we also know that it's about not going into crowds and making choices. The other leaders are not going into crowds. The other leaders are not going into restaurants that are crowded. We went into 2 yesterday. What message are you sending to Canadians by continuing to do this?
80% of Canadians, or almost 80% of Canadians, made the right choices of wearing their masks, of keeping their social distancing, of following public health rules and guidelines, and mostly on getting vaccinated. Canada is leading the world in vaccinations. We're one of the top countries around the world. That's because Canadians, for the massive majority, stepped up. And Canadians right now are able to go back to restaurants, go back to barbecues at friends' house, go back to things that we have long missed because of this pandemic. And because of 20% of Canadians who still haven't done the right thing, 80% of Canadians shouldn't be able to have a say in how we end this pandemic and how we build back better. Think about that for a minute. Canadians are getting back to normal because they got vaccinated. Yes, we still have to be careful. We still have to follow public health rules. But the people filling up the hospitals right now are the ones who chose to not get vaccinated. And we all agree the Canadians who did the right things should be able to go back to restaurants and movie theaters and gyms. That's why we're supporting the vaccine certificates from the provinces. They should be able to travel on a plane without worrying that their 7-year-old is going to be sitting across the aisle from someone who's unvaccinated. We agree. People who did get vaccinated, who did do the right things and are following public health rules, should be able to get back to normal. Well, why do our opponents think that that normal shouldn't involve the most fundamental right of all, which is being able to choose the government that's going to lead us through the rest of this pandemic and into the future? Right now, the decisions that government is taking, and in the coming months, the decisions that your government will make matter. How we end this pandemic by being unequivocal on vaccines, there's only one party that's doing that. It's the Liberal Party, not the Conservatives. They can't stand up to the anti-vaxxers in their caucus and in their party. How we fight against climate change and create those jobs we need for the future. Again, those decisions will be taken in the coming months, not a year from now, not 2 years from now. So Canadians deserve to choose. Those 80% of Canadians who've done the right things shouldn't be told, oh no, because there's a fringe minority that hasn't made the right choice, the rest of you don't get a say on how we move forward as a country. I reject that argument because I know Canadians deserve to pick the direction that our country is going in right now because it matters for the coming years.
Next question.
Kate Bolingaro from Bloomberg. You've criticized Erin O'Toole's position on how to handle Canada's relationship with China, saying you can't simply lob tomatoes over the Pacific. But that's created a public perception that Canada is powerless against China, especially when it's you versus Xi Jinping. Do you have any regrets about not pushing back more forcefully against Xi?
On the contrary, we have been pushing back in many different ways on China, primarily through understanding that the best way to counter China is to work closely with allies around the world. So whether it's been at the G7 table or at the G20 or with our Five Eyes allies, Canada has been there to coordinate and even to lead on initiatives like arbitrary detentions, on leading on statements along with other partners against Hong Kong, against the Uyghurs, against the treatment of Uyghurs. Canada will continue to work with all our allies, particularly with the United States, to put pressure on China to send the Michaels home. These are the things that we will continue to do in a way that is effective, not a way that is megaphone politics.
Following up.
So speaking of allies, this ties into conversations about Huawei. Xi Jinping has continued to tighten his grip on Chinese tech firms and has made them even more subjugated to the Communist Party. Will you commit to banning Huawei from Canada's 5G networks if you're reelected?
Every single decision we take needs to be grounded in science and experts. And we have worked with the international intelligence community. We have worked with our national security experts, and we will make the responsible decisions that keep Canadians protected and ensure that we're moving forward in a way that gives opportunities for everyone to grow their businesses, our economy, safely and securely.
Next question.
Morning, Ashley Burke, CBC News. Mr. Trudeau, on Jody Wilson-Raybould's book, how do you think that that book will impact your image during the election campaign, and what do you make of the timing of it being released during the last week of the election?
I think Canadians know that we have been a very bold government, a very ambitious government for the things we needed to do on reconciliation, on fighting climate change, on growing the economy for the middle class. And we will continue to do that. And when you do big things, not everything always goes in the way you'd like. And people who were allies and fellow travelers in a particular fight take different perspectives in different directions. And it's unfortunate, but obviously I don't spend a huge amount of time dwelling on that. I spend my time focusing on how we're going to continue the hard work of being there for Canadians, of building a better future, of fighting for better reconciliation, of fighting climate change, of standing up for families like this one, and for, yes, bringing Canadians forward into a better future. This is about the challenges and the obstacles that Canadians are facing. And that's what I stay focused on.
Following up.
The excerpt of the book that was released today is about your ability to make decisions and to lead. Do you think that you could have handled anything better or differently to ensure Canadians can trust that you do that?
Again, I have demonstrated throughout these past 6 years that I'm able to build an extraordinary team that delivers for Canadians. Strong, thoughtful, independent leaders gathered around me to push in the same direction. I'm proud of the amazing people, of all the amazing people that we've been able to gather around to do really big things. And I can't help but think back to those first years of our government where we did really big things with Jody as an important part of the team. And it's unfortunate to see how things went from there. And I carry the responsibility for much of it. But I can't let that slow me down or turn me away from my focus on doing what I promised every day when I came out of my house in the beginning of this pandemic, but the promise I've made since back in 2015, to have Canadians' backs and to build a better future for everyone. That's what I'm fighting for. That's the future I am focused on building for everyone. Écoute, je comprends que quand on veut faire des grandes choses, quand on assemble une équipe de personnalités fortes, diverses, avec tous et chacun une croyance profonde dans la direction qu'on doit prendre le pays, que ça ne va pas toujours fonctionner à l'idéal. On le sait. Mais moi, je n'ai jamais hésité d'ambitionner pour le pays, d'ambitionner dans les choses qu'on voulait faire, surtout d'ambitionner pour les Canadiens. C'est ce sur quoi je me concentre depuis ma première journée en politique, de me battre à tous les jours pour les Canadiens, pour un meilleur avenir. Et c'est ce que je fais depuis. Pendant la pandémie, quand je sortais tous les jours de chez moi pour m'adresser directement aux Canadiens, c'est à eux que je pensais, c'est à vous que je pensais pour livrer un meilleur avenir pendant la pandémie et en sortant de la pandémie.
Next question.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. Mr. Trudeau, the incidents of hate in this country have increased under your watch. You've witnessed that firsthand with protesters, or mobs, as you've called them, over the past few weeks. Your platform calls for a national action plan on combating hate by 2022. But why should Canadians trust you're committed to addressing this in the next 3 months when you haven't in 6 years as Prime Minister?
I would absolutely disagree with that statement, Kevin. Over the past 6 years, we have done huge things. We set up Canada's first ever anti-racism secretariat that has stepped up in identifying and fighting against alongside communities things like anti-black racism. We were the first government to recognize anti-black racism, systemic discrimination, and unconscious bias. Recognize the UN Decade of People of African Descent and work with the black community on their priorities, which included making changes to our justice system, eliminating mandatory minimums, but also investing in community organizations led by the black community, and on top of that, responding to their biggest concern, which was access to capital for black entrepreneurs. $400 million for the black entrepreneurship strategy, because you can't talk about just fighting racism and intolerance if you're not also giving the tools to success that, because of systemic discrimination, have been too long unavailable to members of the black community. We step forward. Ikra Khalid, here with us today, step forward in the House of Commons to move a motion forward condemning Islamophobia. Now, today of all days, on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, but over the past months, after the terrible attack in London, Ontario on the Afzaal family, no party has any problem recognizing that we need to condemn Islamophobia. But when ICRA put forward M103 to recognize Islamophobia, the amount of hate and vitriol directed at her, including from members of the Conservative Party who voted against it, Erin O'Toole was one of them who voted against it. We saw we have work to do in this country to identify the problems that we can even attack, that we can then attack. We have invested in community safety programs to protect mosques and synagogues and community centers for various ethnic communities. We have continued to step up to call out racism and intolerance wherever it's seen, because we know that the only way to move forward as a country is to move forward together and to listen to each other and to learn from each other, not to affix labels, not to allow hate to fester in corners of our society. And yes, we are seeing vocal hatred and intolerance rising in some pockets of our communities. And the question that all the rest of us have to ask is, what do we do? Do we sit back and say, oh, well, let's leave them space for their anti-vax beliefs, for their misogynistic beliefs, because we don't want to ruffle the boat, rock the boat, or ruffle feathers? Or do we stand up? Do we say, no, not in Canada, not in our Canada. We leave room for everyone and we stand up for each other in Canada. That's what we've done over these past 6 years. That's what we will continue to do.
Following up.
I appreciate that you disagreed with me in the premise of the question, but at the same time, you also agree that there has been a rise in these types of incidents of hate.
Which is why we need to keep doing
more.
Sir,
I'll just finish my question. I'm sorry, sir, but well, what type of accountability do you take? Because you have been Prime Minister during this rise. So what type of accountability do you take? What else could you have done while you were in power? We're in this election now that many of your opponents say we shouldn't be in. What kind of accountability do you take for the past 6 years for that rise?
I will never apologize for standing up for what's right. I will never apologize for unequivocally standing up for a woman's right to choose. I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2 plus kids' rights to not have to undergo conversion therapy. I will always stand up for the rights of a Muslim family to walk down the street free from worrying about being attacked because they are visibly Muslim. I am not going to ease off for 1 second on standing up for Canadians who continue to stand up for each other, who look out for each other. And because we are seeing an increase, not just in Canada, but around the world, of hateful rhetoric, of discriminatory groups, we will continue to call them out. We will continue to list far-right nationalist and white supremacist groups on Canada's terror list. We will continue to stand strongly with communities against the things that would divide us and the people that would harm us.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Steve Shearer, Reuters. You said today that you carry things and you've had to respond several times to the SNC-Lavalin affair, which happened more than 2 years ago. Virtually every time you make a new announcement, we do our jobs and ask you, well, why didn't you do that 6 years ago? But at the same time, you've also been Prime Minister for 6 years. And I guess I wanted to turn things around and just ask, do you think, how do you think you have changed over the past 6 years as Prime Minister? And do you think that now you have the experience that makes you a better Prime Minister, and why?
You can't work for Canadians for 6 years as Prime Minister, serving them, building a better future, without being transformed by the opportunities you have to connect with people, by the successes you've had, and by the challenges that you still have to meet. I have been incredibly privileged to work alongside not just Canadians these past 6 years, but an extraordinary team of leaders. People like Chrystia Freeland, people like Ahmed Hussein, people like Omar Al-Khabra around the cabinet table. Incredible candidates from coast to coast to coast continue to step up and bring their perspectives and their solutions to the shared vision we have. Yes, being Prime Minister has transformed me in many fundamental ways. It has made me understand just how much there is still to fight for, how much there is still to do. The question on childcare, for example, that I've been posed a few times, has really made me reflect. Why would you put Canadians to an election now when, the Conservatives could reverse the childcare decision? Well, the reality is any government that gets into power can reverse anything, just about anything a previous government did. That's the way our democracies function. And it becomes all the more important to make sure that Canadians see the choice so clearly on how we're moving forward now to end this pandemic for good, to build a better future where we're fighting climate change even more actively, where we're supporting families even more generously, not just because they're the right things to do, but because they're the smart things to do. I continue to learn and grow every day on this job, and I am so excited for the challenges and the opportunities to continue to do even more alongside Canadians in the coming years.
Do you think you're a better Prime Minister now than you were in 2015?
Absolutely. I hope tomorrow I'm a better Prime Minister than I was today. I'm a teacher. Every day is an opportunity to learn and grow and reflect, and I do that. But it's not in service of becoming a better person. It's in service of building a better country. And that's what I will stay focused on.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Tom Perry, CBC. Do you understand, on Jody Wilson-Raybould, do you understand how your conversation with her may have left her with the impression that you wanted her to lie or mislead people?
No, I don't.
Can you elaborate on that? Why do you think she got that impression?
I'm not going to get into those conversations. I will say, quite frankly, this is an issue that was discussed and picked apart extensively 2 years ago in committees, in testimonies, in analyses. It's unfortunate when two people who share a very similar vision for building a better future end up falling out, end up going in separate ways. But I genuinely, obviously regret how it ended up, but I don't regret the things that I chose to do to stand up for Canadians and move forward, because every step of the way, that's what has to guide me. That's my responsibility as Prime Minister.
Following up.
Sure, you were asked about this earlier. You've got the leader of the Bloc Québécois saying that you didn't stand up for Quebec strongly enough in the debate. You've got the Premier of Quebec saying, essentially, vote for Mr. O'Toole. How do you fight that going into Quebec? Do you think that's going to sway any votes? And how do you fight that trying to win votes in Quebec?
I continue to focus on the things that matter the most to Quebecers. And what matters most to Quebecers right now is ending this pandemic for good. And Mr. O'Toole tries to promise 90% of Canadians will be vaccinated in the next 2 months, but he can't even get 90% of his candidates to agree to get vaccinated. How he thinks he can end this pandemic in Quebec or anywhere else across the country with that kind of weak leadership is not something Quebecers will fall for. Quebecers want us to move forward even harder, even faster, even more ambitiously on the fight against climate change. And Mr. O'Toole won't. He'll bring us back to the Stephen Harper days. And Mr. Blanchette can't, because he's not going to form a government. This is the things that Quebecers need. Quebecers want more spaces in childcare, as do people across the country. Mr. O'Toole is going to rip up agreements with Quebec and the other provinces on delivering families that support they need, and quite frankly, on businesses, the injection of women who can get back into the workforce because they know their kids are being properly cared for. These are the things that Quebecers care about most. And on the other things that Quebecers care about, we're there, whether it's on supporting culture, whether it's on supporting language. There are no disagreements on that at this point, or very few. We're there on the things that matter to Quebecers, and I have every confidence that Quebecers understand the stakes in this election and the important choice that needs to be made, like all Canadians.
Next question.
Abigail Beeman, Global News. The Toronto Star is reporting that your candidate in Oshawa told a community newspaper they needed to pay $300 to participate in a panel. Do you have a clear policy for candidates on asking for money for interviews?
Yeah, don't do that. It's a really dumb thing to say and to offer, and she fully apologized and withdrew that.
Okay. And in response to Michelle Rempel-Garner's defamation notice that she issued to your party put out a tweet that said this is a lie, accusing her of editing out that video. It seems very similar to when your party put out an O'Toole video and a portion of it was edited out. What do you think about that, and will you be apologizing as she's asking for?
I'm not following the details of that, but I do know that consistently Ms. Rempel-Garner, if she wants to actually set the record straight, she can come clean on having told Canadians that we weren't going to get vaccinated until sometime in 2030, perhaps, instead of having enough vaccines for everyone in this country as of well over a month ago now. The misinformation, the disinformation that the Conservative Party has continued to put out in this election campaign highlights yet again the choice facing Canadians of fighting this pandemic and building a better future while fighting climate change based on science and experts, or based on ideology and special interest groups that the Conservative Party continues to pander to.
We'll take one last question.
John Iveson, National Post. Back to Jody Wilson-Raybould. She says in the excerpt that was released this morning that you turned on her because you didn't get your own way. Is that how you experienced that incident?
No.
Can you elaborate on that?
Is
that who you are, that you would turn on somebody because you don't get your own way?
No. I will always be unequivocal in doing what I think is right, doing what I know is right for Canadians. In this case, it was making sure that we were standing up for thousands of jobs across the country. But these are all things that we talked about at length, including you and I, 2 years ago, before the last election. These are things that yes, are going to be written about, but at the same time, my focus needs to be on Canadians, as it always has been, and on building a better future for them and helping them make the right choice in this election.
Thank you very much. This is what ends today's press conference.
Merci tout le monde.